Hello, I apologize. I seem to have got cut off for some moment there. So I hope we can start again. Just to recap, my name's Anthony Warner. I'm a food science writer. I write for in the UK for New Scientist and for the Sunday Times, and which is called The Angry Chef's Guide to Spotting BS in the World of Food, Bad Science, and the Truth About Healthy Eating. So I was just talking about the book generally, and it's really an investigation into a few fad diets, into a few sort of well-known fad diets, and also looking at the psychology of why people are so drawn to pseudoscience in the world of food. And I think that's a really interesting question. And as someone who's worked in food all my life, it was something that really fascinates me. Is why is it that when we're looking at food and particularly diets, people are so drawn to this sort of bad science? And perfectly intelligent people are getting dietary advice from sort of Gwyneth Paltrow or Victoria Beckham, rather than the hundreds and thousands of professionals who are far more informed and intelligent. Particularly dietitians are being supported very well by a dietitian community in the UK, and I generally get a lot of support because I often say the things publicly that dietitians aren't generally allowed to say in their professional capacity. So the book is about diets and that, but it sort of goes across a few of the sort of the big diets like sort of clean eating and like paleo, and some of the sort of more slightly more disturbing fad diets like the alkaline diet and the GAPS diet, which is a pseudoscientific treatment for conditions like autism and ADHD, and explores the science behind them, but also what people are getting wrong and why this sort of pseudoscience is so persuasive and so difficult for people to such a difficult world for people to navigate, and really looks at sort of the guilt that underlines food and food science, and how people are made to feel so guilty about eating all the time, which is such an unhelpful thing to do. And that was kind of always been my motivation for writing. It's been about helping people navigate the world of food and feel less guilty, because I feel food is quite a lot of the time under attack from people telling us we shouldn't eat this thing, or we're eating the wrong thing, or we're eating in the wrong way, or eating at the wrong time. Whereas I think we'd all be much better served if we relaxed a lot more around food and made it helped us. We could help people find a relationship with food which is just better. So I've got a few comments coming through. So I think there's a general agreement that guilt is this sort of really pervasive thing in the world of food, and I think that's largely because there is an industry out there and money to be made sort of giving people advice about food and giving people certainty. And anyone who knows anything about nutrition science will know that it's one of the big problems is it's incredibly complicated. It's actually incredibly complex. It's incredibly difficult to give people specific advice, and generally simplicity is what people really crave. But when that's not an offer, when you're an evidence-based practitioner, giving people simple advice is kind of difficult, because you kind of have to encourage people to accept complexity. But the problem with that is, the people who sort of sell pseudoscience tend to offer real certainty. So you're generally, if you're an evidence-based practitioner, you're up against people who have an advantage in that they're selling certainty. And what they're selling isn't true, but they give people simple solutions to complex problems. So say that complex diseases, mental health conditions, or even diseases like cancer have a simple cure and a simple solution. And I think that's sort of one of the most powerful reasons why people are so drawn to pseudoscience, especially in food, because nutrition science is complex. There's no simple solutions. and there's no simple answers. You have to accept a certain amount of complexity, and that can be enormously problematic, and that's very difficult for our brains to do, to actually sort of accept that things are complex and beyond simple control. And food seems to be this thing that we sort of take stuff into our body, and we have so many misconceptions about that and what that actually means. We have this idea that you are what you eat, for instance, which is one of my one of the things that I like to try and debunk as much as possible. We have this idea of essentialism. So people think maybe that if they eat collagen, because that's sort of something that comes from the skin and bones, that will help them have better skin. And it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how biology works, really. There's no way that eating collagen is going to go through your gut and come out and somehow magically reach your skin. It's a complex protein, but there's an entire industry selling collagen supplements for food, which we're told is for great for people's skin, and there's all sorts of diet books selling that information, and it's obviously not true to anyone who knows anything, the slightest sort of basic rudimentary knowledge about science. But it's a very easy thing to sell. It's like, if you eat this, it will help this happen. It is just this sort of simple narrative that people really, really like. Okay, so I've got a question here, and it's it's about probiotics. So it's about whether or not that pills survive stomach acid, which is a great question. Probiotics is obviously one of these things which is very much people looking for a simple solution to a complex problem. People want to have some sort of magical food. We all understand something of the gut microbiome, but anyone I know who studies the gut microbiome or has a really good knowledge of what goes on in the gut microbiome will say it's incredibly complicated. It's actually very complex, and we don't quite know what's going on yet, and it's very difficult. And there's no there's no really good evidence, as far as I know, of the benefit of probiotics, in terms of a proven health benefit. Certainly in the European Union, there's no claim you can make on probiotics in terms of defined health benefits, but it seems to be really appealing. And the funny thing for me that I find is where there is good evidence, which is in eating lots of fibre, which is generally thought to be a good thing for gut health, it doesn't really appeal to us. And that's a really interesting psychology. So this idea that you can take some magical thing which will improve your gut health is really appealing. So if you have a magical pill or a magical drink, then that's really appealing to us. But if you're encouraging someone to do more of something, like eat more fibre and eat more vegetables and eat a variety of stuff, that's a really hard psychology for people to get. It's kind of, we're doing more of something for a health benefit. When we're very young, when we're children, the things that keep us safe and well tend to be the things that there tends to be avoidance behaviours, tend to stop. You're told to don't do that, don't play in the road, put that down, take that out your mouth. And they're not like doing more of things. So in our sort of our psychology, it's quite difficult for us to get our heads around doing more of something in order to be healthy. And that, I think that's quite an interesting psychology, and it underlines a lot of where we think where we long for benefit, as opposed to where benefit actually is. So I mean, people talk a lot about naturally probiotic foods, which I think is great, to eat fermented foods. Lots of foods we eat are fermented, but I think you should eat them because they taste good and you enjoy them, not as some sort of penance, as a lot of people seem to do. Okay, as regarding how to survive a stomach acid, I really don't know. I mean, it is a very complex area, and there obviously is some evidence that some of them can get through in certain formats, and that might depend a lot on the format in which you drink them. And obviously they are quite resistant to extreme files, but we know so little about that. I don't know anyone who's got a really definitive answer for how that might work. Okay, so I got a question about low carb, high fat diet, and just about the about the various people pushing those sort of diets in the UK and in South Africa, and then some of the sort of attacks. And I am someone who gets a lot of attacks on from members of that sort of diet community, because I have questioned publicly, that low carb, high fat diets are this sort of panacea for all sort of health harms, and will cure all sorts of diseases. And I was particularly critical of the ketogenic diet, which I know there are some very, very keen advocates. And I think, I mean, honestly, I think if I'm someone who doesn't believe we should tell people how to eat, or be very prescriptive about telling people how to eat. And that's the most annoying thing that I find, is these people are just saying this is how you should eat, and anyone else eating in double ways is wrong. But what I really think about that it shows is the sort of strength of attacks that I get from those sort of people, and I'm sure there are plenty of dietitians who get similar attacks. I know there are many in the UK, especially from the ketogenic diet community. It really shows how tied in people's diet has become to their identity. And I get the similar number of attacks from vegans, and strangely enough, I get completely the opposite attacks. I get vegans telling me that I'm part of a conspiracy to hide the harms of animal fat, and I get sort of ketogenic carnivore dieters telling me that I'm part of a conspiracy to hide the benefits of animal fat. All I do is attack this sort of dietary extremism. But it's amazing how diets have become so tied into people's identity. You read people's Twitter profiles, being a vegan or being a ketogenic diet or a low carb dieter is very much part of these people's identity. It's very much tied into something as who they are. And that's really interesting, because it just makes people so inclined to adopting false beliefs. If it's something part of someone's identity, if you're attacking it and saying, well, it's not quite true, that's not actually that simple, things are far more complex, cutting out all carbohydrates is probably not a good way to go, and it's certainly not a good way to go for everybody, it's certainly not the sort of diet that we should be recommending for all people, then you really attack something at the heart of our identity, and people get very, very upset. I mean, genuinely, I set myself up as an easy target on social media. I'm quite confrontational, and I'm quite, I'm quite sort of absolute. And people understand people know very publicly that I work for the food industry, and so I'm attacked as being a shill and being this sort of terrible person. And I set myself up for that, but it really shows just the amount of vitriol, the level of attacks that you get is quite amazing. And for me, it's fine, but I know for a lot of other people, it's been pretty unpleasant. There's been some really nasty things said. There's been threats made towards people, and when you consider it's just diet, it is extraordinary that that's happening. But it just shows how these dietary beliefs are so tied to people's identity and how important they are to people. And it's something that I find absolutely fascinating. Okay, it's a good question here. So it says, as a chef, how do you address it when people say things like, "Oh, I'm so bad I ate some of that cake"? Guilt is a thing that I really try and encourage people to have a relationship with food, which doesn't involve any guilt. There's no reason why no one should be feeling guilty about eating any sort of food. I mean, it's such a strange. When I first started reading about this thing, from someone who's been a chef most of my life, and I worked in restaurants and hotels, and just making people nice food. For me, this idea that someone could feel guilty about food, or feel food was considered this sin, is absolutely ridiculous. And for me, it's just an unhealthy relationship with food. We're trying to get people to be healthier, but we're encouraging them to have a really unhealthy relationship with food. And I think there's a very famous study from the food psychologist called Paul Rozan, and he did this comparative study where he got people around the world in different cultures to look at different pictures of food. And there's a picture of a really nice looking chocolate cake on there. And when he showed it to people in the US and in the UK, the main reaction to seeing their picture of a chocolate cake, what's the first word that came into people's mind was guilt. They felt guilty about it. When you showed it to people in France, which at the time, it's not so much the case now, but at the time had a much lower rates of obesity and much lower rates of food-related metabolic problems, the main reaction was celebration. And I think often it's this sort of guilt relationship with food we have, which makes those foods so sort of salient in people's minds. It makes them want them even more. If you consider something forbidden and say it's a terrible thing, it kind of makes you want it even more. And I always find it strange when people talk about an obesogenic environment and food availability and chocolate available in the shops. I see sort of chocolate bars, and I like eating chocolate and I like eating crisps and chips, but I don't find them completely irresistible. And I think some people do find them irresistible. But I have to say that that's got a lot to do. But I have to think that's got a lot to do with this sort of this culture of making people feel guilty about eating them. They become much more prevalent in people's minds when people think that they really can't do it. There's no guilt has no place in the world of food. I just think it does absolutely no good at all. Okay, so I've got another question, which is about one of my favorite subjects. It's about the ketogenic diet. Okay, so yeah, and it's a really good point actually. It says it's about the keto diet. Some people are advocates of the keto diet, yet they mentioned the banana diet, which you just made up 3 seconds earlier. Thanks, Phil, for doing that. Would be equally effective and probably just as unhealthy. And their response is, that's not even keto. I think the point is, and it's very, very true. Well, actually, there's a number of points. People mistake things that would make you lose weight with like a healthy diet. We've become so wedded to this idea that weight is the sole determinant of health, that anything that makes you lose weight must be healthy because you're losing weight, because you're looking in the mirror and you're looking on the scales and you're saying, I'm losing pounds, therefore this must be a healthy diet and a healthy way to live. But obviously, almost anything which creates a rule-driven framework around food will make you lose weight short term. And I think people understand that, but they kind of don't see it in their own diet they advocate. And so ketogenic diet is a massively restrictive diet, so it's no surprise that people lose weight. Does that mean it's healthy? Well, no, it absolutely doesn't. Any diet you make up, in my book, I make up a fad diet and use all the tricks to make something that's convincing you could sell to people. And honestly, people have approached me when I've been doing talks and said, how about this diet that you advocate? And well, I just made that up for my book, and I explain why it's made up. But it's sort of crept into some sort of social media conversations. But it's so easy to make up a diet that will help people lose weight, helping people in the short term. But generally that won't be long term. Generally that won't be sustainable. And if you get things wrong, then it could end up being genuinely harmful. And most dietitians I know spend far more time trying to get sort of good nutrition into people and help people who have the opposite end of the spectrum, to which the dietary problems which everyone talks about. Everyone talks about obesity, but I think people forget that there are many more sort of dietary problems. There's undernutrition is a serious and underreported problem, and I feel that we kind of we've allowed people selling diets to dominate the narrative on food and health, not only in the diet bookshelves, but also at a sort of public health level. So now you have people saying, various diets that helped me lose weight will sort of be the thing that's going to help everybody, help everything at a population level, not understanding the complexity of the situations they're talking about, not understanding that, it's far more than just putting the world on a diet. If you want people to lose weight, you have to individualize advice. You have to sort of help people through problems. You have to make sure that changes people are making sustainable. And it's very easy for people who said, my diet works for you, my diet works for me, and it will therefore work for everyone and will solve the problem of population health. And we have a number of people in the UK doing that right now. We have politicians who've gone on a diet and lost weight and are now saying, this diet is the way to sort of solve population health. And anybody who understands anything about diet and health will understand how that is, that is absurd. Okay, so I've got another question. Yeah, I mean, it's about exercise and my view on approaches to exercise. Yeah, I mean, my view about exercise is a really, really good thing. I don't think if you had a drug or you had a food or superfood or something like that, which had a fraction of the benefits that regular exercise can have for people's health, then it would be like a miracle and it would fly off the shelves and everyone would want to buy it. But we have to be realistic about that and understand that it's not incredibly easy for everyone to exercise. It's not incredibly easy to fit into everyone's lives. And one of the big problems with exercise as well is that it's not, in the short term, it's not probably the best way for people to lose weight. And because of this obsession we have that anything that makes you, the only things that make you lose weight, that make you healthy are things that make you lose weight, we kind of sometimes neglect the possible benefits. And people will be told they have to lose weight in order to be healthy. They will start exercising, and perhaps because exercise doesn't have that immediate benefit, you don't burn off that many calories when you first start exercising, and the people won't be losing weight, and the diet will have a bigger effect. They kind of think, well, exercise is pointless. There's no point in exercising. Whereas, it has such a such a huge impact on people's health. And it can be such a sort of positive thing for so many things, for sort of mental health and for visceral fat and for type 2 diabetes and all these things. Exercise can have huge benefits, but when we're tied to this model of sort of only losing weight is the only measure of health, then I think that becomes problematic and excludes people. And it also said there's an extraordinary weight prejudice within exercise communities, which excludes people from exercise as well. So I think there's a complex thing with exercise going on. It's not just as simple as saying to people, you must exercise. We need to help people through that. We need to help people find ways they can exercise, and also appreciate that it's very, very difficult for some people for reasons we can't perhaps appreciate. So I'm being asked which voice are we hearing right now? Is it okay? So for people who don't know, people who haven't read a lot of my stuff, I generally write in two voices, especially in my blog, but to an extent in the book as well. So I have a voice in my head which I talk to during my writing, which sounds weird, but I'm hoping it's not too weird for people. And the voice inside my head is kind of the instinctive part of my brain, which I think is very important to understand. Anyone who's ever read any sort of Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, it's his book. And it talks about this two-system model of the human brain, where you have a conscious brain which talks, and you have an instinctive one which kind of processes things very quickly and helps you sort of navigate life. And one of the big problems is we make a lot of our decisions instinctively, even though we think we're making them, cognitively. And that leads to a lot of people making bad decisions, and a lot of people taking diet advice from glamorous celebrities rather than people who actually know what they're talking about. And I think, I certainly think I'm talking to you with my normal brain right now. And if you actually could hear the voices going in my head, that would be slightly worrying. But I think the whole point of the writing with an instinctive brain is to help people understand that we all make bad choices. We all get things wrong. It's very easy for people who debunk pseudoscience and talk about such things to kind of dismiss people for getting things wrong as being a bit stupid and not really paying attention. But we all make bad decisions. We all operate on this sort of two-system model of thinking, where we say stuff that isn't do stuff and make decisions which aren't sensible. And I think it really is a really useful thing to think about that way of thinking and try and counter it, and try and understand that we all make bad decisions. I perhaps know more about food than most people, or about nutrition than the majority of people, but I make really, so it's easy for me to look at someone who makes a bad decision and follow some ridiculous fad diet like the alkaline diet or the GAPS diet. But I have to understand I make bad decisions because I do things instinctively. In other areas of my life, it's just food's what I'm interested in. So I just think it helps you really understand that everyone makes bad decisions. It helps you try and communicate these things properly. Okay, so right, I got all the questions I think that I've been asked. If I don't get any more questions, just ask them now. But otherwise, I will sort of sum up, and I'll be on my way in a few minutes. So yeah, I mean, in summary, I write about these sort of fad diets and pseudoscience, and people ask me, what can we do? Because it seems sometimes like there's this unstoppable tide of ridiculous pseudoscience going on, and it's very difficult to fight. It's very difficult to kind of battle against it because it comes, comes from people often with sort of massive social media followings and massive profiles, and they're saying ridiculous things about diet, and people who are interested in evidence and interested in science kind of feel like quite a small voice shouting in the distance. And it's very true that happens a lot. It's a very difficult thing to counter, especially with social media as it is now. We're creating these sort of bubbles and creating these sort of tiny little groups of people, echo chambers of low carb and ketogenic diet people who are very wedded to their beliefs. So what can we do? My view has always been that we need to look at education, we look at science education, and not necessarily science education as in teaching people more nutrition science. I think we need to teach people more critical thinking. I think we need to teach people how to really kind of understand and critically evaluate evidence and understand more the workings of science. Because right now we teach, especially in schools, we teach people a list of scientific facts. We don't teach them what science is, which is this process for getting to the truth. So a couple more questions before I go. Does my book address eating disorders at all, or is it generally on disorders eating? Yeah, I mean, my book does address eating disorders. It has a chapter on eating disorders, particularly as they relate to clean eating and orthorexia, which I know is not a universally accepted term, but it's this sort of obsession with clean and healthy eating. And I do. I mean, I am very conscious of eating disorders. I think anyone writing about diet and health has to be very conscious of issues around eating disorders, especially if you're making recommendations about how people should eat to sort of to a public university. You should be very careful about demonizing certain foods or saying certain things are bad or creating real rule-driven frameworks around food. So I think it's a very important thing to be very aware of. I have a chapter on it in my book, and I've written about it extensively in the past. They are incredibly complex and obviously incredibly multi-faceted. I'm not saying they're driven by diet culture at all, but they are in some ways a product of diet culture and sort of an obsession with achieving a certain weight. I think it's very important to be aware of them, and I do write about them a lot. One more question. How long does it take you to research and write one of my blog posts? It can take a very long time. I have a very good assistant called Captain Science, who is a real person. It's not me, and it's no one who's related to me. It's someone who just helps me. She has a whole load of nutrition qualifications, including dietetics qualification and a PhD. And she helps me with my writing, does a lot of research. But it probably take, I'd say, start to finish. They're usually 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 words. The really detailed ones can take a week or so. Others can take 3 to 4 days. I think you have to, that's kind of difficult. There's a famous phrase that the amount of energy required to refute bullshit is several times the amount of energy required to produce it. And so you're kind of chasing your tail a lot when you're trying to debunk fad diets. So why I think it's very important to get to the heart of why people believe it and sort of challenge that. Okay, Leanne Simmons says she used my Lego examples of explaining omega-6 and omega-3 to her classes, and thanks me for it. There was actually I was really helped in that piece by a dietitian, not Captain Science, who did help me with that research, but Ali Hill, who's an expert on omega-3 and omega-6. in the UK, and she helped me. And I think the analogy pretty much came from her, but I think it's a good way of explaining omega-6 and omega-3. It took me a long time to get my head around that, and I think it's a very, very complex subject. And I think it's often used quite misleadingly by people. Okay, so I think that's it. I think I'm going to go now. So thank you for all your questions. Thank you for listening. If you have any more questions, then feel free to get in touch, either through Facebook or you can go to my website and there's a contact form there. And remember to buy my book if that's the sort of thing you're interested in. It's called Bad Science and the Truth About Healthy Eating. And next year, next January, I have another book coming out by the same publisher, actually no, by a different publisher in the US, by One World, and that's going to be called The Truth About Fat. So thank you for listening, and hope to see you again soon.